Population biology. Here we got to talk briefly about population growth and what are the characteristics of population growth. Population, by definition, is a group of organisms that naturally interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Important characteristics of populations include, where they are, their geographic distribution, how densely packed they are, their density, and their growth rate, how fast they're growing. The density is defined as the number of organisms that are found in a unit area. That could be per square meter or per square mile, depending on the size of the life form. And the growth rate is the number of new organisms that are appearing each year. Three factors affect population growth rates: births or deaths and migration. So whether a population is growing or declining is depending on how many babies are being born, how many life forms are dying, and how many are migrating in and out. Because if things are migrating out, population can fall. So you may have coyotes in your neighborhood this year, but they may all migrate out and then they're all gone next year. Population goes to zero. Um, Under ideal conditions, if everybody lives, if you're doing a lab experiment and you're looking at some tiny little insect and you're growing them, you're going to watch exponential growth take place. Living things grow exponentially, and that's because females don't just reproduce themselves, they tend to reproduce more than themselves in terms of eggs being produced, and they reproduce at multiple birthing events throughout their lifespan. As a result of that, populations don't grow linearly, where they grow the same amount every year. They grow exponentially, which is more every year. This is typical. Number of bacteria versus time in hours growing on a piece of meat left or some milk left out on the counter, exponential. It's arching upward. Okay. Elephants grow the same way, except that you'll notice the time in years is not from 0 to 6 hours, it's from 0 to 750 years. Elephants grow like bacteria in an exponential way. This is pretty typical, though, in a living system. Eventually, this steep upward climb is going to level off. The leveling off here in this wavy section is called the steady state, and E is the carrying capacity at the steady state. Because in the end, the Earth can't sustain an exponential and infinite number of life forms. Eventually, life forms will die as fast as they're being born, and that's what's happening here. Deaths are equaling births, and migration is equaling maybe immigration. The deaths could be due to disease or predation or whatever, or competition, but nevertheless, deaths are equaling births. So if you take a look at this graph here, this is a graph showing lynx and hare populations. It makes it look like they're the same, but the lynx population is in hundreds, and the snowshoe hare population's in thousands. So the lynx is in green, and they're outnumbered 10 to 1 by the hares. Okay, so you'll notice that when the hare population is high, the lynx population is high, and when the hare population is low, the lynx population is low. They oscillate about each other. Why do they go up and down? Well, some years are good years and other years are bad years. And ultimately, it all depends on the plants and how well the plants can produce food. The earth is not a constant system. Some years are good, some years are bad. So the years when there's more food for rabbits or hares, then the hare population goes up. And when there's more hares, there's more lynx. And when there's less food for hares, there's less hares. And when there's less hares, there's less lynx. And that's why you see this graph. Predators and prey tend to oscillate about each other, but they're never going to equal each other. We learned about that in the trophic discussion, the trophic level discussion back in a previous section of this chapter. Here, the lynx population is in the hundreds, and the snowshoe hare population in red here is in the thousands. So there's two things that will determine death rates: density-dependent things and density-independent things. Density-dependent things are things that will kill faster if the population is dense. These are things like competition, predation, parasitism, and overcrowding. These factors can only reduce numbers when the numbers are high and density is high. If organisms are all spread out, then parasitism and predation and stuff is not going to be a big deal. Now, density-independent factors also take a toll on populations. They work equally well on dense and sparse populations. This is, cold frosts, late frosts in the spring, early frosts in the fall, droughts, floods, fires, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, etc. Those kill indiscriminately. It doesn't matter how dense the population is. Now, we might as well talk about one specific population, and that is humans. Human population growth is no exception. It's just like all other living things. We are still in the exponential phase of our population growth. Our world population size has exceeded 7 billion. The only time human population is believed to have fallen was during the plague in the 1300s. By country, the United States is only growing because of immigration, but many countries are growing exponentially due to birth rates. We have experienced here in the United States the demographic transition, which is a decline in population and growth experienced by many developed countries, mainly caused by the increased education of women. A histogram can tell you the story of a population. These are 3 histograms that show you the number of boys versus girls in a population. If you look carefully, the boys outnumber the girls at birth, but pretty quickly the girls outnumber the boys later in life. They tend to level out pretty quickly. You'll notice there's more boys than girls here in the young ages, but by the teens it's starting to level out. Boys do stupid things with testosterone, and boys are genetically inferior to girls because of the problem with the X chromosome. And so this is United States. The sides are fairly straight, until you get to the upper years where you're dying of old age. In a super developed country that is senescing, you'll have it tapering in at the bottom. This is a country that's in population decline. Lots of old people because of developed medical infrastructure, but declining birth rates because people just aren't having as many kids. That has to do with the education of women. This is an under or undeveloped third world country. Women are not educated. They're having massive family sizes, and they're starting to have babies at an early age. And so there's lots of very young people, but then you'll see we're going inward rapidly, unlike these graphs. That's because the death rate's so high. People are dying in every age transition. And at the top, oddly, there's in some groups, there's actually more males alive than females, especially in like the Pakistan histogram. And that's because birthing for women is so hard on women. They die from birthing events. So right now, the world population growth rate is declining, but we could easily end up over 10 billion. And the greatest problems we're going to face in the future are overpopulation. You'll hear people arguing about that, but they are people that don't understand biology. We are definitely, right now, if the Middle East wasn't as crowded as it is, we would not have a huge Syrian refugee crisis like we have. Overcrowding leads to stress, which leads to strife and war and famine. And that's the problem. We don't have that problem here because we're not overcrowded here. But we have that in many countries because of overcrowding. We'll talk more about this in class.